Our show celebrates visions of gardens created by 45 New York Artist Circle artists. I am Lois Bender, the curator, whose call for art asks for artists to create their garden visions sourced from their dreams, memories, observations, and imagination, accompanied by their literary inspiration and a personal statement giving insight into their choice of art, garden, and literature. Reviewing all the submissions revealed wonderful personal stories about the artist's experiences with their chosen gardens and their creative process of expressing the synergy of these inspirations. A rich variety of garden categories, observations, memories, and fantasies has produced a virtual kaleidoscopic experience in this panorama of gardens: Edenic gardens, city gardens, childhood gardens, gardens of healing for reading and daydreaming, bacchanalian gardens, glasshouse gardens, eye candy gardens, and more. Let's stroll down this garden gallery path of beautiful gardens, which divides naturally into the garden rooms of the fondly remembered gardens, joyously reserved gardens, and boldly imagined gardens. Our narrative starts by remembering the first gardens in our Western civilization story, the Garden of Eden, the primal garden of innocence, symbolizing our iconic ideal image of life in paradise. Okay, can everyone see? Let me make this a full screen. Okay. We wish Allie Berman was here, by the way, but she'll hopefully be back. And so she was supposed to be here tonight, but she can't be, and I hope she feels better. So this is the beginning page of our show. And the banner is artwork that I did to start off the show. Let's start. So let's talk about the artwork at the top before I give the show to our first reader, Leah Poehler. First is prologue. Let's begin our show with the poetic words in Shakespeare's Midsummer Night's Dream, which accompany the show's banner artwork, Dreams of Flower Shadows by Lois Bender. Shakespeare's lyrical phrases serve as a muse for this wooded fairy garden bank of ferns, moss, and flora, night flowers floating in a moonlight earthly sea of blue and green shadowy silhouettes in the spell of an amorous love potion. Shakespeare's romantic romp entwines the worlds of dreams, magic spells of nature, enigmatic human love, and the waking reality in an enchanted garden fantasy. A wonderful way to begin a show. These are Shakespeare's words. I know a bank whereon the wild thyme blows, where oxlips and the nodding violet grows, quite over canopied with luscious woodbine, with sweet musk roses, and with eglantine. There sleeps Tatiana, some time of the night, lulled in these flowers with dances and delight. Midsummer Night's Dream, Act 2, Scene 1. Our readers will stroll through our gallery with you, reading the artist's name, their artwork title, the literary reference, and then the artist's words, acknowledging a few variations. And now let us begin with Leah Poehler, our first reader, reading in the Garden Room, Remembered Gardens, leading with the Bible creation story. So Leah, I'll hand off the reading to you. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Then he commanded, let the earth produce all kinds of plants, those that bear grain and those that bear fruit. And it was done. So the earth produced all kinds of plants, and God was pleased with what he saw. Evening passed and morning came. That was the third day. This is from Genesis. So my work is a bronze sculpture called the Apple Crib. It's part of a series dealing with various versions of the bed. Literary inspiration came from a dear friend who asked to write about my work, Poet Laureate George Wallace. Here, in the density of metal, Ephemeral desires live like secrets. A buried apple core, a play on words, a paradox, a garden, a cast of lace embedded in bronze. They are the light of air, twigs. I sign my bed sculptures with a bronze apple core in tribute to the biblical bedding of Adam and Eve and the forbidden fruit. Always asking myself, what happened to the apple core? How many trees have grown from their very seeds? The next work is by Audrey Anastasi. It's entitled Eve Fleeing the Garden After Masaccio. Inspiration came from the lyrics of a country song. I beg your pardon, I never promised you a rose garden. Along with the sunshines, there's got to be a little rain sometime. Audrey writes, as an urban gardener, I find great joy in creating areas of light and color in pots, window boxes, and small shady patches of soil between the buildings. But in my art and in my philosophy, a garden is a symbol of the cycle of life and therefore includes death, the truth existing somewhere in the subtleties between the extremes. Eve shows a figure fleeing the Garden of Eden among colorful fig leaves. Also referenced are Adam and Eve as they were interpreted by Masaccio, the first artist to go beyond the formal illustration of the biblical text to show the deep suffering of their fall from grace. The next image is by Barbara Slitkin. It's titled An Earful of Birds. Her quote comes from Gerard Manley Hopkins. Glory be to God for dappled things, all things counter, original, spare, strange. Says Barbara, now complete, I have revised and elaborated on the earlier versions of my very dense garden. This dappled garden lives inside my inner being. It circles back to a time when I was very young. In the days of my youth, I would explore vacant lots and neighbors' yards. I would hear my mother call me to bring me back home. This was my private world. I'd explore the wildness of nature, raw and untamed. Tanara Windham has quoted Mthikosi Zulu from The Garden, The Serpent in the Garden. He says, I wish you would listen, see the truth from a different light, and perhaps acquire wisdom. Do not hear, but listen from I who lurks in the shadows. Tamara writes that she found the dead snake on a sidewalk in Staten Island, its head cut off. The poem and painting refer to a Gnostic text titled The Testimony of Truth from the Nag Hammadi Library, a collection of early Christian and Gnostic texts dating from the 3rd and 4th centuries. Eliza Decker has titled her work, Reading, Fort Tryon Park Garden. Her quote is from 2009 Samuel Menashe May. In May, wonders without number, lilacs for one thrive in the sun. The interplay of light and shadow and bugs, animals, and people in gardens is one of my favorite subjects, she says. Sam wrote this poem for me a few years before he died. I had arranged for him to give poetry readings at a couple of shows I had organized. And being perennially short of cash, it was his way of thanking me. It was May. He knew that I liked gardens and was obsessed with light. And this handwritten poem literally fell out of a book of his poetry this afternoon when I was trying to find a solution of literary inspiration for my work in this show. Thanks, Sam. Alice Harrison titles her work Garden of Reading. and she quotes Marcus Tullius Cicero. Exactly what we heard from Lois. If you have a garden and a library, you have everything you need. For Alice, both garden, nature, and books and libraries feed the soul. As a visual artist, I see a garden using trees, plants, flowers, and a library of books using words as paint. Among my fondest memories is reading in the gardens I created on my deck, and then a balcony, which I likened to a rainforest. Cheryl Aden, in her work Beauty Behind Bars, quotes Edna St. Vincent Millay. I will be the gladdest thing under the sun. I will touch 100 flowers and not pick one. For Cheryl, a photographic image is a representation of something, so it by its nature removes us from it. I want viewers of my work to truly see, to really experience a subject, even while removed. St. Vincent Millay experiences abundant joy and honors the flowers by not picking them. This is also a removal of sorts, born of respect for living beauty. And now we'll hear from Cheryl.
Thank you, Leah. This artist, Bonnie Epstein, titled her photograph, West 94th Street, 7/11/2020. Her quote is from A Tree Grows in Brooklyn by Betty Smith. There's a tree that grows in Brooklyn. Some people call it the tree of heaven. No matter where its seed falls, it makes a tree which struggles to reach the sky. It grows in boarded up lots and out of neglected rubbish heaps. It grows up and out of cellar gratings. It is the only tree that grows out of cement. It grows lushly, survives without sun, water, and seemingly without earth. Bonnie tells us, in normal times, proper, planned, mulched, and manicured gardens in pots, planters, and plots decorate our Upper West Side Manhattan neighborhood with prim flowers and plants. But in 2020, self-seeded rogue gardens burst through fencing, hedges, and cracks. Lush, wild, leafy growths and voluptuous blossoms filled the neighborhood with sweet scent and lavish green. To me, the gardens of 2020 were metaphors for hope and healing. Liz Curtin's collage is called Sidewalk Cracks. She quotes Eudora Welty. Gardening is akin to writing stories. No experience could have taught me more about grief or flowers, about achieving survival by going your fingers in the ground to the limit of physical exhaustion. Liz reflects, the lingering scent of lilacs takes me back in an instant to my childhood. A large lilac bush with copious blooms dominated one corner of the backyard and perfumed the air with its heavenly scent. Years later, I would plant a lilac tree in my own garden in Vermont and watch it grow and bloom, reminding me of my childhood dreams of exploring and playing. I've never lost that childhood magic of looking for and finding joy in nature's bounty. Its spell holds me still, and I am forever grateful for that. This collage is by Yvonne Lamar Rogers, and it's titled Mama's Backyard. Yvonne reminisces, I created this mixed media collage, remembering my childhood spent in my grandparents' backyard. Cherished memories like me and my little sister playing hide and seek, jacks and jump rope, and old Mary Mac, Mac, Mac. Freshly washed clothes hanging on the clothesline, waving in the breeze, helping Mama weed the vegetable garden, eating cherry tomatoes right off the vine. Generations gathered, telling stories about the olden days while sipping on freshly made lemonade. Papa telling us about singing with gospel quartets that traveled the Old South. Chicken, ribs, and hot dogs smelling so good on the barbecue pit built from old bricks. Great-grandma enjoying Mama's roses in her all-over apron that she only took off for church. With the passage of time, my sister and I watched our children having some of those same experiences in that beloved old backyard. Backyard gardens grow families. This next artist is Fran Bieler. Her mixed media is named Longing, Grandma's Garden. Fran uses an excerpt from Edna Ferber. But always to her, red and green cabbages were to be jade and burgundy, chrysoprase and porphyry. Life has no weapons against a woman like that. Fran tells us, in the Jewish tradition, we name children after relatives who have passed. So I never met Grandma Frances, or Fanny as she was known. I have only the stories I heard growing up and a handful of black and white photos to remember her by. I know that she owned a health food store for a time and was very concerned about natural sources for fruits and vegetables. My father was born in New York City, but when he was a boy, they moved to the Jewish farming community of Toms River, New Jersey. I don't know if Frances ever actually had her own garden, but the garden in my work is more of a metaphor for her love of nature and the garden of her family, from which I later bloomed. The artist Peggy Pugh Gottlieb offers her photograph Sunflowers. She shares a quote from Helen Keller. Keep your face to the sunshine and you cannot see the shadows. It's what the sunflowers do. Peggy writes, the sunflower is the Ukrainian national flower. It is also this city sunflower on a one-way street, like many growing with abandon and freedom wherever it sprouts in many urban oases and city street gardens. It is now a symbol of courage and democratic resistance. Prayers to Ukraine from every city sunflower freely growing in defiance worldwide. Monroe Hodder gives us her painting titled A Garden for Ukraine. Her inspiration was T.S. Eliot. April is the cruelest month, breeding lilacs out of the dead land, mixing memory and desire, stirring dull roots with spring rain. Monroe says, would that we could give the Ukrainians the solace of a garden. Instead, there is only a shattered and dead land filled with the pain of loss and the stirring fight of resistance. This artist is Joanne Labotsky. Her artwork is titled There Will Come Soft Rains, from a poem by Sarah Teasdale. There will come soft rains, wartime. There will come soft rains and the smell of the ground, and swallows circling with their shimmering sound, and frogs in the pools singing at night, and wild plum trees in tremulous white. Robins will wear their feathery fire, whistling their whims on a low fence wire, and not one will know of the war, not one will care at last when it is done. Not one would mind, neither bird nor tree, if mankind perished utterly. And spring herself, when she woke at dawn, would scarcely know that we were gone. Joanne reflects, my artwork's title is inspired by the poem of 1920 by Sarah Teasdale, which in turn inspired the dystopian short story of Ray Bradbury. The poem refers to the 1918 German Spring Offensive during the First World War and the flu pandemic of 1918. Ray Bradbury was inspired by this poem in 1950 and wrote about the aftermath of a nuclear bomb, basically a warning. literary writings in 1920, then 1950, and reaching now in 2022. My work with this title is an abstracted farm landscape. A farm is a type of garden for practical reasons. I grew up in this type of landscape. You can see the slanting dark rain at the top. Imagine floating over it, and you can intuit fields, an area where the dirt is turned over, ready to be planted, fencing, rocks, water. I think of this work as farmland becoming part of the wild again in the dystopian way of Teasdale's poem. Both Teasdale and Bradbury warn us our time here on Earth may be limited by both disease and disaster. And for Bradbury, not even nature survives us. The next section of our exhibit is Observed Gardens. And we begin with our next reader, Janet Morgan.
This painting is called Conservatory Garden by Holly Maker Ram, and this is her poem. The garden, choosing a best view of the conservatory with a glass dome reflecting the sky, begins her painting. So many sensations caught her eye. She could make the red plant the star by juxtaposing green bushes haloed in yellow, and the mauve leaves paling and autumn notes, water, pigment, paint. The artist notes that this work is an example of her observational garden. This watercolor was painted on plein air in September 2020 at the New York Botanic Gardens. Janet M. Schneider's work is called The Terrace at Goldenrock, and she quotes Maya Angelou. On Saturday afternoons, when all the things are done in the house and there's no real work to be done, I play Bach and Chopin and turn it up real loud and get a good bottle of Chardonnay and sit out on my deck and look out at my garden. The artist says, I made this painting to preserve my memories of this extraordinary place. I knew the gardener, a genuine plant whisperer, who shared with me the stories of the many plants and his love for them. The Maya Angelou quote reminds me of that garden, like music, has the power to transport us to an ideal realm of the spirit. I'm Janet Morgan, and this is my drawing actually called The Secret Garden Central Dancing Tree. And I've chosen a poem from the Radiant Sutras, which are contemporary versions of Sanskrit texts from the 7th century, translated by Lauren Roche. Trees have desires, rocks have knowledge, jugs are full of emptiness and joy. All embodied ones have this in common. All are propelled by the same one, whose pulse beats in our heart and sheds insularity. Be all pervasive, delighting in kinship everywhere. So during the pandemic, we found refuge in a little garden near us in Brooklyn that we had ignored before, and took our ground chairs and art supplies and looked closely at the fabulous blooms and trees. Ellen Pliskin's artwork is called The Garden Archway. And she quotes the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam from the 12th century. Yon rising moon that looks for us again, how oft hereafter will she wax and wane? How oft hereafter rising look for us through this same garden and for one in vain? The artist says, the garden has always been a sanctuary for me. It is a space to contemplate one's place in the universe and even one's mortality. This piece is by Regina Silvers called Weeds and Tiger Lilies, and she writes a poem. No one tilled the earth to prepare this garden. No one planted the seeds. No one watered them carefully with hoses or watering cans. No one pulled the weeds that flourished amid the wildflowers, causing a riot of color and texture. Thank you, wind, for carrying the seeds, and birds for dropping them. Thank you, rain, for nurturing this natural wild garden, the one of the miracles of nature, the grand designer. Pamela N Casper's piece is called Raised Bed Garden, and she quotes Colette from Flowers and Fruits. How I love this ideal flower bed of mine with this sumptuous border of ifs. I shall dig them all into their storage trenchers, some in my memory and others in my imagination. The artist tells us, as a young adult, before I had my own garden, reading Colette's descriptions of flowers and gardens resonated with my love of nature and of color. Colette describes each flower's attributes and imbues them with personalities. Colette's mother, Cito, was an avid gardener, and so they were ever present in Colette's childhood. Hence, gardens figured in Colette's writing as a place for memories, imagination, and of promise. I painted this garden, which I also planted, because I was intrigued by the dappled light over the surfaces of the flowers, the range of lilac and burgundy colors, and the interplay of low growing clusters with spiky towers of hollyhocks. Like Colette, I regard this garden as a place for memories, the ephemeral beauty of the here and now, and the promise of what might be. There we go. Diana Kurz, Butterfly in the Garden triptych. She quotes Robert Frost, who simply says, butterflies, flowers that fly and all but sing. The artist says, while drawing in a cousin's garden in Asheville, North Carolina, several years ago, I was intrigued by a single large yellow butterfly among the scraggly bushes and plants. I watched it go from branch to branch for at least half an hour and thought it would be a great subject to paint, to try to capture the movement and relationship of that bright yellow shape to the green foliage. I remember thinking of a quote that I had read describing butterflies as flowers that move. And our next reader will be Barbara Slitkin.
Thank you. Suzanne Pemberton, Secret Garden, with words by Frances Hodgson Burnett. The Secret Garden. Everything is made out of magic. Leaves and trees, flowers and birds, badgers and foxes and squirrels and people. So it must be all around us, in this garden, in all places. Suzanne Pemberton states, friends of Ms. Burnett commissioned Betsy Potter Fano to create this beautiful fountain in 1927. It was in the Conservancy Garden in Central Park. This painting was done en plein air on one of my many visits to the garden. This is August Garden in July by Linda Stillman, with words from Diane Ackerin. Gardeners all share a love of natural beauty and a passion to create order from chaos. From Linda Stillman, to document a garden of annual plants throughout 3 seasons, I planted a grid in the form of a monthly calendar of flowers and herbs in my garden in upstate New York and photographed it from the air in July, September, November, and the following May. August's garden is about the passage of time in nature, how flowers grow and die, and how we try to preserve the memory of fleeting moments of beauty. Here we have Phyllis Rosner's Cactus Garden. Words by Theodore Rothke. How cool the grass is. Has the bird left? The stalk still sways. Has the worm left? From Phyllis. I feel myself part of this rock garden that bursts with cactus and rosy flowering allium, sculpted shapes that live together in a tapestry of color and form. This is Water Garden, painted by Norma Greenwood. I perhaps owe having become a painter to flowers. I must have flowers, always and always. Claude Monet. From Norma Greenwood. My husband and I celebrated our 30th wedding anniversary in Monet's garden. We were the only visitors since Giverny was not yet on the tourist agendas. We brought an elegant picnic from Vachon and sat on an old wooden bench that I could swear was the same one Manet and Renoir occupied on many occasions. The small bridge reflecting in the water and the water plants were a quiet symphony of form and shimmering colors. We watched the afternoon light change the shapes and the colors. It was easy to see why the gardens were an endless source of renewal and inspiration. I cherish the memory of Giverny as it was then. The special romantic experience of the gardens have remained with me as inspiration and joy. This is Lynn Friedman's Tropicacia, garden excerpt from Octavio Paz. Adrift clouds, sleepwalking continents, countries without substance or weight, geographies drawn by the sun, erased by the wind, four walls made of adobe, bougainvilleas in their peaceful flames, my eyes bathe. The wind passes amidst praises from foliage and knee-length weeds. Lynn writes, inspired by a month at the White Arts Colony in Costa Rica, where the foliage was infused with color and light, and one felt the melodic, unconscious green insistence of the subtropics. This is Bonnie Stein-Snyder's Upstairs Orchid Conga line. Instantly recognizable, orchids are singularly beautiful. Unlike the rose, with its classic beauty, the orchid is exotically unique. They inspire us to appreciate the power of individuality and the beauty in diversity. Kirsten Stanton, from her book, Stories and Guides for Nature Lovers and Spiritual Seekers. Bonnie's words. I love the social aspects of New York, but winter pushes you inside. Your comfort zone shrinks to your home or to the entertainments available in cultural centers of the city. The greenhouse gives you a space to remember the pleasure of walking in nature's warmth and enjoying the beauty of green life. Going into the greenhouse of the botanical garden in winter is like getting a warm green hug in a cold, hostile world. Next, it is with great gratitude and pleasure to present artist and curator, Lois Sylvia Bender.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you for insisting that I read my own work. Thanks so much. This is my work, Lois Bender, and it's called Dreaming Majorelle Color. My discovery of the Majorelle Garden was a revelation. This Marrakesh exotic tropical desert garden in Northern Africa represents lands where many epiphanies about painting and color occurred to our 20th century modern masters, Matisse, Auguste Mack, Derain, Paul Klee, Kandinsky, and they went to Tunisia. Matisse went to Tangiers in Morocco. I had hoped for this call for art would create opportunities for new discoveries in pairing art and literature. For myself, I discovered the poetry of E.E. Cummings as a perfect match of the written word to my art in his painted word images of a colorful, vivid, resonating garden. He seems to say in his poem, This is the Garden, that colors may come and go, just as human life and flowers may come and go and die, but nature lives on in perpetuity. His startling image is of a garden fountain that cheats death in its silver-fingered immortality. The garden fountain's luminously tiled designs stole my heart. They relate to the magical carpets of garden imagery of Persian ancestry. Majorelle was named for the French artist Majorelle, who created the garden in the 1920s. With his death, the garden went into disrepair, and then it was bought by Yves Saint Laurent to be his inspirational home, and then recreated later as today's garden tourism destination. This Moroccan garden has many design influences: exotic, Islamic, Persian, Mediterranean, Near Eastern, Arabic, and French Art Deco. The vibrating fields of color on walls with glowing iridescent shimmering shadows create mesmerizing colors worthy of inhabiting dreams. My tableau of garden views envisions Edens of color. This is the Garden by E.E. Cummings. This is the garden, colors come and go, frail azures fluttering from night's outer wing, strong silent greens silently lingering, absolute lights like baths of golden snow. This is the garden. Pursed lips do blow upon cool flutes within wide glooms and sing of harps celestial to the quivering string, invisible faces hauntingly and slow. This is the garden. Time shall surely reap, and on death's blade lie many a flower curled in other lands where other songs be sung. Yet stand they here enraptured as among the slow, deep trees, perpetual of sleep. Some silver-fingered fountain steals the world. Thank you. The next garden room is the Imagined Gardens. Let me go there. And our next reader is Priscilla Stadler. Thank you, Priscilla.
Thanks, Lois. This is Bascove's Red Tulips. And Bascove notes, these red tulips became even more riveting upon opening, presenting a contrast of black markings and stamen and luminous pistils. And her poem is Erica Jong's Still Life with Tulips. Because you did, I too arrange flowers, watching the pistils just like insolent tongues and the hard red flesh of the petals widening beneath my eyes. They move like the hands of clocks, seeming not to move except when I turn my gaze. Then savagely, in the white room, they billow and spread until their redness engulfs me utterly. This is Emily Stedman's Biophia, Little Buddha. And Emily writes, in the natural environment of gardens and forests, I find a timeless and universal reality that supersedes the staccato of modern life. The watercolor paint in this picture was allowed to ebb and flow organically to create the shapes of flowers and seeds. A poet and psychotherapist, Dr. Nina Yavel, writes of the simple act of looking at a flower and being in the here and now, and lives and works in Greenport, New York. Here's her poem. Like a little Buddha, belly button exposed, I trace the outlines of the flower, wonder how its parts have come together, feeling both pistil and stamen while one ear strains for the bumblebee. Karin Bruckner's Peculiar Blossoms. Karin shares an excerpt from Goethe's Faust, Part 1, Easter Walk. From the ice they are freed, the stream and brook, by the spring's enlivening, lovely look. The valleys green with joys of hope. Hark, sounds of village joy arise. Here is the people's paradise. Contented, great and small, shout joyfully. Here, I am man, here, dare it to be. Karen reflects, there is a German saying that there are things whereby, quote, whereby therewith very peculiar blossoms sprout. Etwas treibt, seltsame Blüten. Forgive my German. I am often confronted with that concept in my experimental approach to making art and the outcomes that present themselves to me. As strange and peculiar as things may turn out to be, appreciate them for what they are, not what you want them to be. My idea of garden is closely associated with paradise. When I was little, I lived in a small low-rise apartment complex on the outskirts of Zurich. At bedtime, I would routinely skip out into our garden in my pajamas and bid a good night to the flowers. There was no turning in before talking to my plant friends. To this day, I consider my days in Switzerland akin to paradise. They gave me solid roots and a love of growing and nurturing that has stayed with me all my life. Perhaps paradise lies where we are allowed to grow into and be who we are. This is Eileen Hoffman's Memories of a Girl. Eileen writes, the influence of gardens can be seen in the expansive history of flowered wallpaper. I have always felt that these flowered wallpapers in the background of so many domestic scenes held the stories being lived. Those flowers are part of the premise of my work, making the undervalued and unseen culture of women's lives visible. Eileen quotes Germaine Greer. A garden is a kinetic work of art, not an object, but a process. open-ended, biodegradable, nurturant, like all women's artistry. Cacophony by Wendy L. Moss. Wendy shares an Indian proverb. All the flowers of tomorrows are in the seeds of today. And she writes, I can appreciate this quote as I understand it to mean that the seeds are the present moment, and there is an optimism which we lack so much of during these current times for a future with beauty as it is represented in the flowers that await us. Behind my garden is an open field. In October, the milkweed flowers turn into exquisite dried seed pods. The seeds are surrounded by fluffy white softness. When the wind blows, the seeds drift in the air, making visible the wind's currents. My work is imbued with pattern and texture. I was inspired by the intricacies and complexity of these seed pods. My title is Cacophony, but the seed pod was the spark towards capturing this image. And this is my painting, Rooted 83. I'm Priscilla Stadler. Envisioning networks underground and investigating the precarity and resilience of connective structures, these relationships emerge above ground among humans and also underground among fungi, soil, and roots. Much of my work has developed from a fascination with these underground exchanges. I cannot see them, but I sense and explore through media that includes scratchboard drawing, spray paint, and painting with Sumi ink. My work has been inspired by biologists, including Robin Wall Kimmerer. She and other writers and seekers have planted seeds of inspiration for my imaginary underground gardens. And this is a quote from Kimmerer. A garden is a nursery for nurturing connection, the soil for cultivation of practical reverence. And our next reader is Lois Bender.
Thank you, Priscilla. Thank you. Our next artwork is by Victoria Ginberg, and it is called, oh, sorry, excuse me. It is called Dying Lotus 2. She writes a poem. I emerge from the muddy depths, reaching for the light, a bud transformed into a flower, symbol of purity, guiding us on our path towards enlightenment. The sun below the horizon, I die, to be resurrected at first dawn, supported by my roots, stable and strong. The next artwork is by Laurie Horowitz, and it's entitled Beauty from Decay. She quotes from Stephen Mitchell. What people love about life is its miraculous beauty. What they hate about death is the loss and decay around it. Yet losing is not losing, and decay turns into beauty, as beauty turns back into decay. We are breathed in, breathed out. Therefore, all you need is to understand the one breath that makes up the world. And from Laurie, beauty from decay is nature's way of nurturing beautiful, fruitful patterns of growth from the cycle of life. I cultivate these mushrooms and seek them out for inspiration in my work. And the next artwork is by Darcy Spitz. It is called Ecstatic Joyful Bloom. She writes her own poem, and it's titled A Garden of Love. Gentle hands, sun-warmed skin, hazel eyes filled with love, joy blossoms between us. Darcy says, my image garden flows from my subconscious. Painting is like dreaming. Cecilia Andre is our next artist, and her work is entitled IFEL, and it means intermittent flashes emanating luminosity. And she says, well, first of all, she quotes Margaret Atwood for inspiration, and the quote is, gardening is not a rational act. And Cecilia says, for the past 8 years, I have volunteered as a horticultural partner of the High Line in New York City. As I garden there, I feel an irrational embrace from the plants. Their surrealistic bent in my light-filled artwork points towards the earth as a light-hungry being. The yellow color in the painting equals the intermittent flashes emanating luminosity, or IFEL, nourishing the earth with sunshine and healthy green water for it to produce food, mushrooms, and beauty, flowers. Earthworms are seismic shifts from the depths of the earth where movement is constant. The IFEL acronym is open to other definitions, as in surrealistic games, such as immense feelings of enduring love, or interesting fields of eerie longings. And our next artwork is Allie Berman's, and hers is entitled Seed Sentinels in My Garden. To illustrate her art, she chose a poem called Earthworm, an excerpt from the author Gregory Delanty. And I'll read that poem excerpt. What a miner pistoning in a slow motion through the underworld of the earth, engineering vents, channels, water flow, converting death and dearth, day in, night out, each eyeless body, digesting the soil, nursing earth. And Allie writes, a garden is like a life. You have to care for it, think about it, participate in its growth and future, from the hopeful beginnings of seeds nestled in the ground to the hard decisions of how much to chop off and deadhead flowers so they would come back year after year, bigger and better and stronger. And the worms, how I love the worms, those hard-working sentinels creating air and space for baby seeds to spread out, root, flower, and grow. I was lucky to have a garden during the COVID years. And we come to Barbara McDougall, and Barbara's work is entitled Diversity. And she has found a quote from Winston Churchill to illustrate her work. And reading that is, diversity is the one true thing that we all have in common. Celebrate it every day. And she writes, I dreamed a garden. It has a voice. Whether it was created by chance or through meticulous planning, a garden has the power to summon the senses and spark ideas in a myriad of ways. Due to a freak accident followed by a comedy of medical errors, I found myself painting the alphabet as a prescribed form of physical therapy. Flowers have been my most loyal muse, and as the letters took shape, a connection was made. Both flowers and letters provide the foundation of infinite designs or messages. Flowers and words sow the seeds of thought and emotions. Both are cultivated and experienced in unique ways, in their one-of-a-kind voices. And now I will turn the reading over to Elisa Decker. Thank you, Elisa.
Thank you, Lois. The first work you see here is by Gail Rothstein, and it's called The Epical Garden. Rothstein chose a quote from Kurt Vonnegut's Cat's Cradle. "Life is a garden, not a road. We enter and exit through the same gate, wandering. Where we go matters less than what we notice." Rothstein says this about her piece, The Epical Garden. Epical describes events so important and significant, they have the power to usher in a new epic. This work imagines a perfect, balanced new world. I haven't thought much about gardens consciously, yet as I look over my work of this last several years, I see a multitude of garden themes. I can only imagine I am searching for my Eden. This work is by Peggy Rolfe, and it's called Persephone's Gate number 2. She chose a poem by Emily Dickinson called Come Slowly, Eden. Come slowly, Eden, lips unused to thee, bashful, sip thy jessamines, as the fainting bee, reaching late his flower, round her chamber hums, counts his nectars, enters, and is lost in balms. Peggy says, I love the lawlessness of gardens that are grown primarily for pollinators. Within the chaotic light and color of this vegetation, I find an energy lacking in precisely ordered beds and borders. This energy informs my recent abstractions in acrylics and in monotype. Having a small city garden plot is a gift, and growing plants is much like making art. You try different things. Some of it works, some of it doesn't. Some of it is so surprising, you want more. And when the bees come, you know that you found an audience. I've recently experienced the cross-pollination between printmaking, specifically monotypes, and painting. The monotype here, Persephone's Gate number 2, refers to the Greek divinity who is identified as the gatekeeper of spring and who bestows everlasting life through nature. This painting is called Flower Show, and it's by Carolyn Oberst. She writes, Upon seeing flower arrangements that were beautifully and artistically done, I found that I was drawn to paint them. The vintage dresser-back frames I was finding at the time gave me a way to make this series of paintings more sculptural. The frames reminded me of altars. Flowers have been used on altars all over the world, so flowers seem like the perfect subject for the series. Their beauty, fragility, give them a spiritual aspect. For example, the mother, a spiritual leader in the Aurobindo tradition, felt that each flower has a special meaning. So when I started thinking about this idea of flower altars, I was reminded of something she said in her book, Flowers and Their Messages. Flowers speak to us when we know how to listen to them. It is a subtle and fragrant language. And now we have a Barbara Swanson Sherman's The Garden at Night. Barbara writes, the garden is lit by the stars. On trips to Seville and Istanbul, where water can be scarce and is treated as a sacred gift, I learned that a garden is considered to be an earthly embodiment of heaven. In this piece, the blue and white tiles represent water not running free, but contained, saved, husbanded, and inspiring gratitude. And we have from Barbara, Emily Dickinson's poem, Wild Nights, Wild Nights. Wild nights, wild nights, were I with thee, wild nights should be our luxury. Feudal the winds to a heart in port, done with the compass, done with the chart, rowing in Eden. Ah, the sea, might I but moor tonight in thee. Our gallery show will end with an animation by Helene Mukhtar, echoing the invitation by Dickinson's words, might I but moor tonight in thee, sharing a wild bacchanalian night in a cosmic garden fantasia. Helene writes, this animation called Walk on the Wild Side, based on computer graphics, live videos, and my paintings, shows a magical garden in a dream world where wild beasts roam and strange characters stroll. Others dance to the tune of a pulsating rhythm. Trees, weeds, and giant mushrooms sway and undulate gently in the background, while pulsing psychedelic colors burst onto the screen. The inspiration for the piece is the lyrics of a song written by the group Questarnoco. This song, called Twisted, is now the animation's soundtrack. And before we see the video and hear the soundtrack at the same time, I'm just going to read those lyrics that were inspirational. We were chasing the rising sun. After we bit into that magic apple, we got turned on. Colors flashing in our eyes. We wrote our name over the tangerine sky. Twisted, yeah, twisted. On a psychedelic dive into the wild side. Twisted. We tiptoed on a crooked line, and then we followed an arrow into a shining light. ground control. We're spinning like a top tower. It's time to be lifting off. Twisted. Yeah, twisted. On a psychedelic dive into the wild side. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful. And thank you, Elisa. And I'm going to show that. So we're going to have, it's about a little over 2 minutes. Get ready. It's wonderful. Well, let's give a round of applause to everybody. That was terrific. Can you hear me?
Yep.
And I wanted to open the floor up to dialogue. I know we're running late, but if we have a few more ideas to talk about, that would be great. I wanted to thank everyone, and that includes our readers tonight. I want to thank Eileen Hoffman for doing tech, and to the garden curatorial team. That's Pamela Casper, Diane Churchill, Vicki Ginberg, Ellen Pliskin, Janet Snyder, and Regina Silvers. And